Welcome to episode 5 of my Air Superiority 2025 series. Having been beaten by Extreme last time out, we were knocked down to the losers bracket where we met AVReS for a rematch of when we met in the qualifier, which of course we narrowly won 3-2. This time out it's all on the line though. Whoever loses this match is out of the tournament. The winner will go on to try and fight their way through the losers bracket. We're on desert this time, and once again for most of the video it will be more of a highlight style to try and keep the video length reasonable. AVReS like to run with 2 Grippins, flown by Shark and Detra, and 2 flankers flown by Runaway and Bongo. We're running with Sab and Biscuit in the Grippins, Supreme in the Hornet, and myself as always in the flanker. And I thought this would be a good chance to talk about the strategizing and preparation that goes on for this. So in tournaments like this there is a map ban process. I'll spare you the details, but basically we go back and forth until we settle on one of the 5 maps to play, and this happened shortly after our game versus Extreme on the Saturday. With this game being the next day, we had around 24 hours to plan. As AVReS actually played their first match against Voyager also on desert, it meant we had a ton of server replays to watch through. So basically I will go through every replay. I'll take a note of compositions of the enemy team and general strategy. For example, are they playing C, are they playing passive or aggressive, and then notes on if anyone gets out of position a lot or if there's a theme to how they are winning or losing. I'll also note down things like loadouts on the flankers. It's useful to know how many ERs they tend to take and stuff like that, and do they take the occasional ET every now and then. Now for this match the general conclusion was that they were tending to not play overly aggressive, at least when you compare to say how Extreme were playing in the last match, so we were pretty happy with our standard C rush, thinking there's a good chance they just let us have it. Then we can consolidate with the ticket bleed in our favour, and to be fair that's exactly how the first game played out. The problem ended up being that we simply got pincered. The Grippins and 1 flanker push over the desert towards our D point, and then Runaway pushed on after capping their home cap to flank us. Because we didn't get a pick, it becomes increasingly harder to keep both flankers suppressed on either flank. Eventually Bongo gets a window completely unopposed and he can just casually guide this ER in to take me out. If I show the sensor view, you can see how there's just no pressure on Bongo as he guides the ER in. He's just free to do as he likes. As I'm right above the melee as well, I didn't spot the launch initially, and by the time I did it's just too late. You can also see Supreme in the Hornet in the middle as well at a lower altitude, so he's not able to maintain pressure on the flankers either, which is part of the reason why you like to bring a Hornet, is that missile count to fulfill that job, and this is what happens when you get outflanked basically. Shark and Detra in the Grippins just need to disrupt us and survive long enough in the brawl for their flankers to get an opening, which Bongo got with the ER, and then we see Runaway is able to push in once they take me out and we have no cover up above anymore to stop them. He picks off Biscuit before full locking an ER into Supreme that he can't defend, and then finally Bongo can slot on Sab's tail and they take the first round. Moving on to game 2, we didn't make any drastic changes to strategy here, just an acknowledgement that we need to put more attention onto the flankers, and maybe not get too tunnel visioned into the Grippins. But we also get a very early crit in this game on Shark, which is obviously a big help as it prevents their Grippins from achieving that same dual push that they did in game 1, which is obviously what disrupted us a lot in the first place and created that opening for their flankers. So Biscuit gets a darter up at Shark as he pushes for C, and Shark just never quite manages to notch it. The missile proxy fuses on his tail and takes out his rudder. As we switch to Supreme's POV with myself top right, we can see the effect of this. Shark is still flying but has very limited control and is lagging behind with very little effectiveness. This means Detra is alone pushing into us, so this allows us to split more effectively. We don't have the same pressure coming from those Grippins. Biscuit can go off to delay Runaway from getting the flank, while Supreme, myself and Sab can deal with Detra and Bongo. There was some tricky defending from myself and Supreme at times, but critically we're able to pile a lot of pressure on Bongo, who eventually succumbs to one of Supreme's AMRAMs. As he dives and turns to defend one of my ERs, he strays right into Supreme's path and is not able to complete the notch. Now Detra does well to survive but is unable to get any kills. He's forced to stay at multi-buff with my flanker still looming above and his openings are limited. Runaway eventually breaks through on our flank, but I managed to notch his ER successfully as I have no other threats to worry about, so I can give all my attention there. Shortly after, he crashes from the joint pressure of us all. At the same time, Shark's rudder can take him no further and he crashes. Detra somehow survives against the odds right up to the end, but the game is up regardless as we've had that steady ticket bleed going this whole time, and we level it at 1-1. Game 3 now, and the opener plays out pretty much identically. I however find myself without any pressure from the grippers or bongo, but I'm conscious of Runaway's flanker pinging my RWR a bit too close for comfort, again looking for that same flank. So I double back this time to increase separation with the others and look to try and isolate Runaway pushing our flank. The theory here is sound, it should at least keep the game neutral with a 3v3 and a 1v1. But we have the cap advantage, so the pressure is on them to make the play. But Bongo gets the timing right on his ER against Supreme and finds a gap long enough to relock it in for the kill. It's quite a good one. Notice how he doesn't start defending the AMRAM and 77 coming his way early. He waits until the AMRAM is basically on top of him before firing his ER and defending. This means he can minimize the time he spends in his defense. If you defend a missile early, remember the further it is away from you, the wider the field of view is. Thus the higher chance it relocks you when you recommit. By defending late, you reduce this drastically, and there's also a good chance it's flown past you anyway by the time you recommit. The knock-on effect is I immediately have to turn back in and start getting pressure on their push to the D point, where we're now outnumbered with no cover from above with Supreme gone. This does put me in a relative notch to Runaway firing his ERs at me, but eventually I get boxed in. Shark gets underneath me in the Gripen, whilst Bongo shoots me from ahead and I fail to notch one of Shark's darters, and it all just kind of falls apart from here. After taking me out, Shark full commits to a head-on and takes out Biscuit. Meanwhile, Detra was able to grab Sab's tail and they move 2-1 up in the match. Right, game 4 now, and we decided at this point it was time to reevaluate. The issue we felt we had was the two flankers approaching at different angles. Whereas I take the home cap and look to link up with my team, Runaway takes their home cap and pushes our flanks, splitting our attention too much, with me and Supreme having struggled with the ERs up to this point. We couldn't really decide on the best course of action, so I said okay, I'm just going to try and mirror Runaway and just fight him. I was confident I could at least trade in a worst case scenario, or at least push him back into their team and eliminate the flank. So we decided to try this early on, whilst we could still afford a loss if it went horribly wrong. So I take my normal early game 77 shot, but then I hold my line and fire the ER. So immediately Runaway starts defending into the center map, unable to push the flank. He tries to scare me off with his own ER. Now, I thought about going defensive in case he grabbed the relock, but I know both my 77 and ER are still on this RWR and closer to target. So it would be a massive risk for him to recommit unless he gets the timing absolutely perfect. So I just move slightly out of the IOG and fly past it, confident that he's probably not going to be able to relock me in time. This affords me a dominant position as he's fully cold heading back towards the center map melee without any pressure on me, and I'm free to start heavily pressuring him. So sure enough, I pick up the Severe with the ER, and it should have been a clean kill, but this one hurts to watch back as I fell a routine notch after, and it's a trade. If we check it back in sensor view, you can see my main issue was my speed. I'm compressing a lot of this speed, so I'm just not quite nimble enough to notch properly. I do get round just about in time, but by this point it's close enough that I just can't defend the angle gating anymore. So that leaves the game 3v3 over the desert, but importantly the pressure is on them as once again we have the ticket bleed in our favour. It's not going to come to that though. First up we have Sab rolling on the deck, hitting a crazy snapshot head on against Shark, whilst him and Biscuit are also getting launches up at Bongo above. One of these from Biscuit slips through and takes him out, looking like a combination of clutter on his RWR and it dipping into his blind spots every now and then, causing him to lose situational awareness. This leads him to recommit, thinking he's safe, only for the darter to show up right on his nose and take him out. This once again leaves Detra on his own, and once more he survives for as long as he can, but eventually he runs out of options and Biscuit takes him out, levelling the series once again to 2-2. Going into game 5 and the plan is the same. On the back of the previous round we were confident now if we just engage them on equal terms we have the edge. However, this round plays out differently as they're going to full push our home cap and give us C uncontested. This means instead of going for the 1v1 I'm going to immediately turn around after taking the home cap and going cold because obviously all 4 of them are pushing in this direction. Now I can only speculate as to whether our slight adjustment is the reason they changed strategies or if this was their plan anyway to switch it up. Either way, the opposing team completely changing strat is usually a good sign in my view. It suggests they no longer trust their plan A to work and they're trying to find a different way to beat you, a way that they might not have practiced or drilled as much or be as comfortable with. Generally a full home cap push from our perspective is preferable. We get the cap advantage because obviously we know we're going for C and we get that for free, and then we force them to make a play, but importantly they don't really have any real flanking threats. They're all kind of in the same location pushing us here. The game takes some time to develop now, kind of playing cat and mouse for a bit. One important note is we aren't overcommitting to preventing them taking our home cap. When you play C, inevitably at least one of your players, the guy who captures it, can't get back to defend the home cap as fast as the rest of you to defend. So you can put yourselves in a 3v4 if you aren't careful. Instead, what we'll look to do is fly a sort of holding pattern over our D point until we're together again. The general idea we ended up taking in this game is Biscuit and Sab run down the middle in the Grippins to disrupt and draw attention, and then Supreme is going to flank left and I'm going to flank right to try and pinch them. Most critically though, as the brawl starts to develop, Biscuit gets a line on Detra here, who merges poorly over the mountain. Losing a Grippin this early is huge, especially as Supreme has isolated Shark in their other Grippin, so the flankers have no cover. Runaway is forced to try and assist Detra in his flanker, giving up all of his altitude in the process. All Biscuit has to do here is play smart. If he gets into the merge, he wins. It's just a case of defeating the flurry of missiles coming his way. He does just that, gets the 9M off, which Runaway can't flare, and he picks up his second kill. There was a bunch of stuff going on here all at the same time, so I'm just going to show them all sequentially rather than in sync, just so it's easier to follow. So first up I mentioned Supreme had isolated Shark on the left flank. Now on paper a Hornet versus a Grippin is a slam dunk win for the Grippin, but Supreme is built different. He knows that he beats a Grippin attritionally on missile count. As long as he manages to keep the separation until Shark is out of missiles, he can force a favourable position in the merge, theoretically, which is what he does. When he sees Shark is down to 9Ms, he pulls in and flares, and this allows him to fire his last Fox free, which Shark can't contest. Now Shark can obviously easily outpull an AMRAM at this range by just turning to his left, but this allows Supreme a positional advantage in the merge. The Grippin would win the extended dogfight, but only if Supreme misses this shot. He does not miss this shot. Meanwhile, I found myself in a 1v1 joust with Bongo. After first notching this missile from below, it's important to keep RWR awareness. I didn't get a launch warning from this missile, possibly due to my blind spot in the RWR, but it doesn't ping it at all when I level off, so I know it's either an ER, an ET, or a 73. Now Bongo is currently notching my own ER, so I know he can't recommit safely to relock if he did fire his ER, so I just move out of the way slightly and flare in case it's an IR threat. Now a few mistakes on my end here. I tried to save the 77 for a better shot, but ended up taking one it couldn't pull in for. I also didn't try and catch him out with any 73s like he's been doing to me. End result is I end up giving up my tail outrunning a 73 that I couldn't flare. I'm now just out of flares and there's no escaping anymore. At this point, however, the game was already done. Bongo is 1v3 and Biscuit can simply slot on his tail and take him out with the 9M. Game 6 and they revert back to their original strategy, so once again I'm going to go straight for Runaway after taking the home cap to cut off his flank. And I'm playing this extremely aggressively, right on the edge of my judgment. I make the double launch first to 77 in an ER for maximum pressure. And as I start cranking whilst taking the home cap, I notice he's playing quite passive with his launches, and this is why I decided to play it more aggressively. If he's going to let me, I'm going to close the gap and back myself to win the fight. At this point he does put an ER in the air, but based on the closure rate and his position, I can simply fly past it. I just turn away from it slightly to my right, and then when he does manage to relock it, it's too close to pull in. Now I have a very strong position and I'm getting close to their team's flank. They will know at this point if I can take out Runaway, they'll be enveloped. I'm making my notches as late as I can to minimize the time I spend defending, which in turn maximizes the pressure I can exert. And I've actually forced him completely cold and would have been well placed to take the kill here, so much so I forced Bongo to turn his attention this way and fire an ER at me. Now at this point I'm in danger of being cut off with two people fighting me, and this ER will be a tricky one to notch, so it's time for me to go cold and use the terrain to get away. We have the cap advantage and I've cut off any flanks, so theoretically my job is done and we can consolidate over the capture points. Meanwhile, however, a brawl had developed, meaning retreating wasn't really on the cards. Sab takes a crit from the multipath lottery early on, and whilst he's still able to continue on, his flight performance is hampered a lot from this point. And eventually, after some head-ons and some defending and recommitting, he runs out of energy and is an easy target for Shark to finish off. Biscuit plays through some head-ons with both Detra and Shark, and as he loops back around to help Supreme, he gets a nice aspect on Detra, who's pitched up to go after Supreme that he can't defend. The downside of this sequence was both Grippins were able to get through and pressure Supreme, so whilst he was able to survive the Grippins, this information clutter makes it difficult to spot the ER coming from Bongo at the same time, which he recommits into and gets taken out. Whilst this was unfolding, I've recommitted after defending Bongo's ER from earlier, and Runaway is not prepared. He's looking in to help the team in the middle of the map, whereas I've got my attention solely on him. I get an unopposed ER off, able to lock it in the whole distance. He's unable to notch or multipath it, and we go into a 2v2 endgame. I've got Shark coming up first on the other side of this hill. My plan here is to angle a 77 up to try and take him out through multipath, knowing the data should struggle to pull in. It does fail to pull in, but Shark also pulls off the multipath. Straight away I'm face to face with Bongo, so I fire my last ER and move to notch his 77, but painfully I'm going too fast to execute this notch. I lose control and I'm taken out. Biscuit survives a while longer, but 2v1 he eventually has to give up his tail to Shark, who takes him out with the 9M. We're getting towards the business end of this match now as we go into game 7 at 3-3. Either team 2 wins away from going through. I go into my joust with Runaway and he does fire earlier this time, making it a bit more neutral. It's not very interesting, we're just trading missiles. I just want to skip ahead a bit to this point and pause it. Now whether you'll be able to see this through YouTube compression, I don't know, but I can see it on my clip from live gameplay, but I didn't see it, or didn't spot it I should say, during the game itself. Now I thought Runaway was parallel to me. Instead what he did was he cut towards center map here in his defense. Now I didn't know he did that, and not wanting to take any risks when I didn't know exactly where he was, I don't want to pop up, and I'm playing quite carefully. The result of this is I actually end up doing nothing in no man's land for quite some time. It's okay though, because the boys locked in. First up, Sab got a filthy snapshot in the head-on against Detra. Biscuit, whilst eventually getting taken out by Shark in the head-on, got missiles up to take out both flankers of Bongo and Runaway, who ventured out of position with no room to notch these launches. Bongo did get missiles off at Sab to take him out, again failing the multi-path lottery. And then I finish off a heavily damaged Detra, finally returning from my vacation on the other side of the map, and me and Supreme find ourselves with a 2v1 endgame against Shark's Gripen. Now this video is going to be pretty long, and this endgame was quite drawn out, so I won't show it all as it isn't very interesting to watch. Funnily enough, Shark actually had no more ammo at this point, but obviously me and Supreme didn't know this. We know he has to try and take the D point, so we just make sure we aren't flying the same lines and wait until he gives us an opening, as we don't need to take risks here and there's no reason for us to do that. Eventually I get his tail and I take him out with 73, putting us a single round away from winning the match. So game 8, we have 2 chances now to win the match, and straight away they're going to mix up the strategy again, once more going for the full home cap push. So with that in mind, I'm of course immediately turning out after taking the home cap, looking to climb and take a position behind my team. And then the usual game of cat and mouse ensues, both teams vying for a better position, trying not to be the first to make a mistake. Our opening comes when Bongo pushes out wide to our left, trying to get a flank. Biscuit and Sab are able to wall off the rest of their team, which affords me and Supreme the chance to double push Bongo in a 2v1, putting him on full defense. He notches the ER just at the last second, as I'm flicking between IRST and PD here to try and make it harder to notch. I'm actually not sure if this trick helps or hinders you, honestly, as the missile does briefly lose track every time you switch to IR. Might be one for me to explore in a shorter video in future and properly test it. But regardless, he can't notch Supreme's AMRAM and we get the kill. It's not all straightforward though. In providing us with that opening, Biscuit finds himself in the midst of their team, with Shark getting a dominant position. Now whilst Biscuit does eventually get taken out by Shark's guns, look how many missiles he defeats in the process. He forces Shark to waste all of his remaining 3 darters and one of his 9Ms. If you're going to go down, make the enemy work as hard as possible for that kill and use as many resources as possible. Now we transition to Sab's POV, who also finds himself in the midst of the furball. After dodging a head-on, Detra is able to take an aggressive line, with me and Supreme not immediately able to pressure and help. This enables him to get a rear aspect darter, and Sab once again fails the multi-pathing lottery, losing his rudder. We're now left with a potentially bad 2v3 endgame with both our Gripens dead, but Sabazis, the Serbian superweapon himself, has something to say about this. He keeps his Gripen in the air, just clearing the mountain ahead. He sees Shark ahead in his sights, throws his plane into lead and holds the trigger down. The round somehow finds its way through, tearing off Shark's wing, and he plummets helplessly into the terrain. And just for good measure, he flares a 9M from Detra afterwards without crashing himself. And now me and Supreme need to try and close out the game. Sab sticks around for a while longer, but ultimately there's not much he can do anymore. I start off with a couple of terrible R73 launches. I'm not really sure what I was thinking with those. They're kind of just a waste, maybe just nerves getting to me at this point. And I know at this point Detra doesn't have any missiles, so I'm just trying to keep my energy up and not give him an easy shot with the guns. Still got to deal with this 77 from Runaway. Notice how I notched downwards. I'm going very fast, so even if I don't get to the notch in time, it should be very easy for me to drive it into the terrain, which I do. Now as I loop back around, I can see an opportunity opening up for me. Sab's still somehow making a nuisance of himself still at this stage, and Supreme's got them both distracted. Detra is going to loop around for the shot with the guns, but I've got very good energy, so I can just make that shot difficult for him. Every time he turns, he's burning more energy. As long as I keep mine high, I can stay out of range of his guns. And now I'm going to get a shot on Runaway with the 73. Now he could just be out of flares at this point. Flanker late game, very easy to run out of flares. Either that or he mistook it for a 77. Either way, he crashes into the terrain, and now suddenly we find ourselves with a 2v1 endgame. Now in this, you're going to see an absolutely monumental lock-in for Supreme to survive for this long. Now I end up going for the D point, trying to strangle the game out with tickets, as Detra is distracted by Supreme, as this is usually kind of the safest option when you have a ticket advantage. Now what I didn't appreciate properly at the time is just how close Detra was to Supreme, and if not for an incredible reversal and almost taking out a Gripen in his Hornet, this game might have turned out closer than it was. As it is, by the time Supreme does eventually get taken out, it's too late. The game and match are ours. So yeah, give some appreciation for the boys in the comments, as they pulled out some absolutely clutch plays in this match. Sav and Supreme especially in that last round. And yeah, that meant we took the match 5-3, progressing to the next round where we would meet Wasted Time, which will be the next episode. Now, I'm not sure when I'll make that episode. The update is looming, and I've been uploading a video a week for about a month now, so I'm also feeling a tad burnt out with all the recording and editing. It's quite tough to keep this up as it's still a hobby for me on top of my personal life and day job, so I'm just managing expectations. That match in particular went for the full 9 rounds, so it's going to be a fair bit of work to put together. Anyway, I'll see you again next time, whenever that may be.
Securing the win out from under AVReS and all of the doubters as they get that 5th and final score that they needed to move on in the loser bracket and sending AVReS out of this tournament.